Hello, community members. Welcome. We are beginning the second day of the LGBTQ People of Color Global South Summit. Today, we begin the second day for the English-speaking Caribbean. Next slide. The theme for this evening's discussion is decolonizing LGBTQ plus existence through resilience and human rights. We have a huge packed program for this evening. And so we encourage you, we invite you to join us and stay tuned. Next slide. So for this evening's event, we will begin shortly with a moment of silence. We will talk a little bit about what this Global South Summit is. We will acknowledge our partnering organizations and participating organizations. And then I shall introduce you to our two hosts, Terry Ann Roy and Marcus Kissoon. And following that, there's going to be a series of things taking place leading up to a panel discussion that will be moderated by Ryan Prasadi. And in that panel discussion, they'll be looking at diversity and resilience through healing and transformative justice. And then Tynette McCoy will give us our closing remarks. Next slide. So I'd like us to take a moment. Let's take a moment, take a deep breath. If you're seated, place your feet firmly on the ground, almost, and let your thighs be parallel to the ground. Place your hands on your lap and take a deep breath. I'd like us to invite, honor, and remember those in our communities who we've lost to homicide, to suicide, to HIV/AIDS, and over this past year, to the COVID virus. Let us also bring into this space many in our communities who are still struggling with the COVID virus and all of its long-lasting effects. Let us bring into this space as well our community members, those who we know who struggle with and against domestic and intimate partner violence, and who still struggle and suffer from family, community, including some of our own and state-sponsored oppression. Thank you. Next slide. So, community members, this Global South Summit was put together by a team of people here in the Global North. What we felt was that considering Black and people of color living along the equator and in the Global South are the largest population on the earth, and since LGBTQ plus people are present in all communities, we affirm with this summit that LGBTQ plus people of color constitute the largest sub-demographic in the world. We are aware that when international media often report on or about LGBTQ plus people of color in the Global South, these often follow a tragic event. Our community's pain is often pathologized and exploited. Rarely, if ever, do we hear, see, experience our community members' richness, beauty, vibrancy, and resilience. We hope to change that image. We want LGBT people of color who live along the equator and in the Global South to be seen and heard who they are as they are. We want to highlight and celebrate our community members' lives. Even though representatives in the diaspora created a framework for this Global South Summit from the Global North, it is imperative that community members reclaim their voice and provide a programming from their respective locales. They tell us, they show us who they are, how they live, how they celebrate, and how they mourn and grieve. So this entire Global South Summit is for people in the Global South, it's by people in the Global South, and it's about people in the Global South so that their voices, their lives can be heard. Next slide. So we'd like to thank and acknowledge our planning team members. We want to thank those from South Africa, Liberia, Nigeria, the Dominican Republic, from Thailand, Guyana, of course, the Philippines, Zimbabwe, and India. Next slide. We also want to acknowledge and thank our partnering and participating organizations, Black Gay Blog, that's based in the UK, the Clementa Foundation, In My Mind Conference and DBGM, XAD Productions, the LGBT Center here in New York City, and Claymont Designs. We want to acknowledge and thank Caribbean Equality Project and ECADE. We want to thank Creme de la Creme House of Fame Foundation and Instab Niger from Nigeria. We want to thank BN Foundation Transition from South Africa and Zimbabwe Rainbow Community from Zimbabwe. We want to thank APCOM, Kias, Swarta Kita, the Micro Rainbow International Foundation, and the Baby Lanes from the Philippines. Next slide. So, community members, I'd like you to join with me in welcoming one of our hosts for this evening. This evening's program is going to be hosted by two people. First, I'd like to introduce Terry Ann Roy, who is an attorney and human rights activist that's based in Trinidad and Tobago. Terry Ann Roy is a young queer attorney and human rights activist with a background in psychology and criminology. Since 2017, she served as a PANCAP youth leader, where she helped to draft a roadmap of strategies for sustaining youth advocacy, the promotion of gender equality, HIV prevention, and action towards ending gender-based violence, and ensuring access to quality sexual reproductive health services to meet the needs of adolescents and youth. Community members, I'd like us to welcome Terry Ann Roy. Our next host, next slide. Our next host is Marcus Kissoon. He's a research officer from the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at University of West Indies in Trinidad. Marcus Kissoon is a research officer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, where his work focuses on gender, child sexual abuse, HIV, and other forms of gender-based violence. As an adjunct lecturer at UWI, he holds a master's degree in gender and development studies from the Institute of Gender and Development Studies. Community members, I'd like us now to welcome both Terry Ann Roy and Marcus Kissoon, our hosts for this evening's program. Terry and Marcus, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us today.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Before we get started, I'd just like to introduce a video that will be played prior to Terry and I opening remarks. So, video.
Love is love. 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 Love is love.
Okay, so I can see we have some lovely drag kings in the Caribbean. So let me get started. I'd like to welcome everyone, panelists, and those who are streaming with us online. On August 10th, 2016, the Belize Supreme Court made a historic ruling in favor of gay activist Kayla Barrasco, striking down the country's anti-sodomy laws. This was the first case launched in the Caribbean and the first case where such laws were overturned. In 2017, the Trinidad and Tobago High Court declared the country's buggery laws unconstitutional as it infringed on the rights of LGBT citizens and criminalized consensual sexual acts between adults. The Honorable Justice Devendra Rampersad stated that it is unfortunate when society in any way values a person or gives a person their identity based on their race, color, gender, age, or sexual orientation. That is not their identity. That is not their soul. That is not the sum total of their value to society or their value to themselves. The experiences of apartheid, South Africa, and the USA during and after slavery, even in the mid and late 20th century, have shown the depths that human dignity has been plunged as a result of presupposed and predetermined prejudices based on factors that do not accept or recognize humanity. To now deny a perceived minority their right to humanity and human dignity would be to continue this type of thinking, this type of perceived superiority based on the genuinely held beliefs of others. Similarly, in 2018, the Caribbean Court of Justice ruled that a law in Guyana, which made it a criminal offense for a man or a woman to appear in a public place while dressed in clothing of the opposite sex for an improper purpose, is unconstitutional. This appeal was also upheld on the basis that the law resulted in transgendered and gender non-conforming persons being treated unfavorably by criminalizing their gender expression and gender identity. The Honorable Mr. Justice Anderson, in his judgment, commented that the law wrongly sought to criminalize a person's state of mind, as there is no test to determine what is an improper purpose. The Caribbean has a history of statutes which prohibit same-sex acts between consenting adults. While some may argue that these laws are rarely used, they continue to marginalize LGBT folk by sanctioning violence and discrimination against them. Last night, I had the pleasure of watching day one of the English-speaking Caribbean's leg of this summit, where the panel included trans and non-binary persons from the Caribbean, who highlighted the need for real and tangible redress for discrimination faced by these groups. Some of the issues faced by these groups included housing sustainability, employment, safe spaces, mental health services, medical care, and HIV prevention treatment. And while each issue affects different intersections of the LGBT community differently, these are all core issues affecting the community. These issues were also exacerbated with the emergence of the coronavirus pandemic, which pushed already marginalized communities into further distress. And while the world may be beginning to overcome this pandemic, many Caribbean countries are still experiencing the harsh effects of this pandemic. While it is important and necessary to highlight the challenges faced by LGBT folk in the Caribbean, I believe that forums and panel discussions such as these are also important to bring hope and encourage members of the community to be resilient in continuing the work for liberation, which has been started by so many brave individuals who have come before us. It would be remiss of me to speak today and not mention my mentor and dear friend, Colin Robinson, LGBT activist of the Caribbean, who transitioned this year. In 2015, Colin stated, "The capacity to write, to joke, and to organize is what kept me alive. Sometimes the way I pour my life into activism is unhealthy, but when people ask how I keep going in the face of frustration and cynicism they experience, my unhesitant answer is about my optimism, that the power of organization is being able to achieve things by working together that one could not alone." So now, even in the midst of a global pandemic, I encourage us all today to continue to organize, to continue to strategize, and to continue to work together to decolonize the existing laws which create and facilitate the discrimination which we encountered. According to law professor Richard Drayton, it is true that the parliaments of the Caribbean were always able to repeal old laws or introduce new ones, but the savings clauses wrapped an extremely imposed legal order formed by centuries of despotism and structural inequality in a knot in a knot which naturally became encrusted with political and public interior, until it became our own. Like victims of a long period of confinement, we thus carry the manners of the prison even after our liberation. Cases such as Jason Jones, Caleb Orozco, and McEwen all show that while challenging these colonial legislations may be difficult, they are most certainly not impossible. And if it's one thing that we as a Caribbean people are, it is resilience. Okay, maybe two things, resilience and brave. Organizations such as SASAD, ECADE, Friends for Life, Silver Lining, KAISO, and Caribbean Vulnerable Communities are all examples of communities working together to assist the LGBT community with redress and to provide support for individuals to whom the legal system may seem unreachable, while also working towards culture shift which is necessary to ensure that legislative change is effective. It is my pleasure to continue to be a part of these organizations, and I look forward to hearing from all panelists tonight, who I'm certain will do an amazing job at highlighting the past work and what is in store for the future. Thank you and happy Pride.
Ariane left off, and I add to the discourse as an Indo-Caribbean male queer feminist activist living in Trinidad and Tobago. I ask us to stop for a moment and reflect on the lives lost to colonize hatred, power, and control. The indigenous people, the first genocide the region has had. Following that, I acknowledge the region's ancestors, my ancestors, the Africans who endured slavery, the Asian workers during indentureship. These people, without the option of free choice, were shaped by the colonizers' notion of gender, including imposing their values on femininities and masculinities, which sits at the core of queer-phobic responses and thinking to today. I echo the words of Afro-Trinbagonian lesbian feminist and Professor Jackie Alexander, who in 2008 wrote in her opening paragraph of her scholarly paper titled Not Just Anybody Can Be a Citizen. In her reflective, she notes, I am an outlaw in my country of birth, a national, but not a citizen, born in Trinidad and Tobago on the cusp of anti-colonial nationalist movements there. I was taught that once we pledge our lives to the new nation, every creed and race had an equal place. I was taught to believe, massa de done, that there would be an imminent end to foreign domination. Subsequent governments had not only eclipsed these promises, they had revised the very terms of citizenship to exclude me. No longer equal, I can be brought up on charges of serious indecency under the Sexual Offences Act of 1986, and if convicted, serve a prison term of 5 years. In the Bahamas, I can be found guilty of a crime of lesbianism and in prison for 20 years. In the United States of North America, where I now live, I must constantly keep in my possession the immigrant green card given me by the American state, making me legal, resident, alien, non-national, non-citizen. Today's summit, we can expect similarities and dissimilarities of queer Caribbean experiences. The words of Jackie Alexander can be felt by many, a collective experience of queer bodies living in the Caribbean and the diaspora. Terry reminds us where we are today, but it's equally pivotal to note our queer histories. Today's summit would allow for us to unpack and celebrate the praxis of Caribbean queer activism and be given the opportunity to see how the Caribbean is challenging post-colonial social systems, or what Andel Gosine calls heteronationalism. This term use allows for us to attempt to understand the work done to dismantle notions of heterosexuality, lack of erotic autonomy, patriarchy, racism, ethnocentrism, quite evident by today's panelists and presentations that we'll hear later on. The work we discussed today, a co-motion, multiple kinds of coming together, including solidarity, networks, unions, coalitions. Sandeep Bakshi tells us, we live in a very exciting historical moment with more potentiality across the planet. Autonomous feminists and queer movements are rising. We are creating convergent critiques, activism, and artivisms across some same and desperate relations to colonialism. coloniality, and other relations of power. The queer Caribbean is proudly contributing and leaving their footprint in the formation of a queer Caribbean civilization, especially one that reflects heavily on the impact of colonization. Our resilience will be showcased today. The decolonial queerness is critical to healing of our Caribbean LGBTQ plus community. As queer people, always defined by the other, the heterosexual ideologies, today we see how our healing is multidimensional. Queer Caribbean will show us today that healing can take the form of inclusion, visibility, and the deodoring. Today we see the possibilities to do this together, not alone, as Audre Lorde helps us to understand that the work of healing is not a luxury, it is political. Folks, I now invite us to just kind of look at a reflection video created by the Caribbean Equalities Project to highlight their 5 years of activism in the Caribbean diaspora in global north. Please view.
After one of our community members was viciously attacked in 2013, the Caribbean Equality Project was launched in 2015 in response to anti-LGBTQ hate violence. In the world's most diverse borough, CEP was unveiled at Queen's Museum. From the moment of our inception, we struggled, we celebrated, and we marched as one to gain public awareness and show the world who we are. From our 5-year running Unchanged support group to our oral history campaign series, My Truth, My Story, our healing justice work centers the Caribbean LGBTQ immigrants we pridefully serve in New York City. 5 resilient and impactful years later, with the help of our community, CEP has reached major milestones.
Right now we're watching the Caribbean Equality Project. That's a Queens-based nonprofit, the only educational agency that empowers and strengthens the marginalized Caribbean lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer voices in New York City through advocacy, community organizing, education, cultural, and social programming.
Each year, we convene our community to celebrate queer and trans Caribbean love by living our values equally. From marching in the annual Pago Parade, to breaking silences and paying tribute to our queer Caribbeans of NYC, our advocacy uplifts and empowers Caribbean LGBTQ voices in the diaspora. While we can't be together in person, we fight together in spirit as one Caribbean for Caribbean LGBTQ rights, racial justice, and equity in NYC and beyond. Happy Pride, and continue to live pridefully.
Right now you will touch the sky. Feel my love unfolding like a laughing flame. All who did not know me when not done, they gon' know the name. Million people coming down, dancing to a song. Love is life and life is love. Blessings from above. Can you feel the love that's in the air? Well, if you feel it, let me hear you say, dancing, moving, moving everywhere. If you feel it, let me hear you say.
Excellent reflection on the last 5 years and the work and contribution of the Caribbean Equalities Project, positioning queer Caribbean people in a larger global context. I stand proudly to say that I'm part of this movement. I've been invited and constantly helping shape who I am and, my everyday community experience. With that said, at this time, we will like to invite Twinkle Paul. Twinkle is a trans rights activist and alumni asylum seeker. We will be discussing and hearing from Twinkle the impact of trans activism and the visibility in Guyana, the Caribbean, and in New York City. So please let us, give full acknowledgement to the hard work of Twinkle Paul as she share with us tonight. Twinkle.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr.
You're welcome.
Good evening to our viewers on Facebook and everybody tuning in from wherever you are. Welcome and thank you for stopping by. Like Marcus said, my name is Twinkle Paul. I live in the US now, but I'm from Guyana. I lived here for 3 years now, and I've been in activism since 2015 or since 2012, sometime around there, but I've been in the work for quite a couple of years or so. This afternoon, what I want to touch on is an experience I had in 2016 and how it ties into our topic of decolonizing our experiences as LGBT people in the Caribbean. So I would say 2016 was one of the hardest years for me. Like, it was one of the toughest time of my life. Anyways, I was attacked on public transportation, and in the midst of this attack, we end up to the police, the person got injured and stuff like this. And all in all, what happened in the attack, I end up getting charged. The person who attacked me, who hit me to my head with a Guinness bottle, who injured me, didn't get charged, but he got looked after by the police. He got taken to the hospital. He got to get medical. I didn't get no medical. Anyway, that was the first bad thing that happened from the inception. The matter went to court. When the matter went to court, the magistrate, the presiding magistrate, who was looking over the case, he excluded me from the courtroom because I was dressed in female attire, and he used the existing cross-dressing laws at that time to justify his transphobic behavior and his ways of excluding me from the court. That really hurt me. It hurt me a lot. Like, to know that, like, when you look through these different levels of discrimination and different challenges that you got to face at so many levels, from the police to the court and everything else. Nevertheless, I did not obey the magistrate's instruction because he had wanted me to dress in male clothing to come back and get the case over with. I didn't listen to him. I ignored it. And I said, look, I am prepared. If this magistrate have to jail me, I'm going to go to jail. But I in no way going in male attire before you. And you just can't get me to do this regardless. I understand you got the power of the keys in your hands to throw me there, but no, I will not do that. Anyways, we protested, we organized, GTU, the community, everybody came out, and we organized, we resist the magistrate transphobic behavior until the matters was dismissed. In the midst of that, like, the whole scenario, one thing that really stayed with me from there on was I had an attorney to represent me in court, and when the attorney made attempts to speak with the magistrate, the attorney was shut up by the magistrate. Like, he was literally told to just stand down or something like that. And at that point in time, I was like, damn, this is really bad. Like, nobody should have to go through this, right? And I was like, you know what? If I am to become an attorney one day, like, I don't think there will be a magistrate or a judge that can shut me up if I have to represent my client on an issue like this or similar issues. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to school and I'm going to take up being an attorney sometime soon. I'm going to go, because of this situation, I'm going to go back to school. So I dropped out of school when I was like 14, 15. So I think at that time I was somewhere in my 20s. I can't remember exactly. It was 2016. Anyways, I started school in Guyana, and after school in Guyana, it was a very homophobic, transphobic, one of the worst environments. I quit school in Guyana. After all this, fast forwarding into like August 2018, 2016, I ended up in a breakup. I was in a relationship. I ended up in a breakup. So it was just troubles upon troubles upon troubles. Anyways, stop school, get past that with a lot of mental stress and headaches. I just can't even talk the entire story, but I'm trying to give you the most of it. 2017, everything just was going down the road. I was going through a lot of pain and suffering in silence. I wasn't talking to much people. Like I was just had this face for everybody, but I was really suffering a lot. Anyways, in 2018, my trans parents decided to send me away to the US and asked me, they begged me, like, Twinkle, is like, if you stay here, there are so many bad things that can happen to you. And, I take into consideration the situations and everything I was going through. And it's like, you know what? Move to the US. I can't say that I've moved to the US in 2018. In 2019, I went to Borough of Manhattan Community College and I got a high school diploma. In 2020, I joined the same college. And right now, I'm a second year communications student at BMCC. I leave the work in Guyana, but I still work behind the scenes a lot, but I don't work on the forefront and stuff like that. And, that's fine for me as long as I can still have my input there. I'm distance away, but I'm not far away. And what can I say? I'm going to graduate in the fall at this college that I'm here, and I'm joining another 4-year college pretty soon. And in 3 years' time, I think in 2 years' time, I believe I'm going to be in law school. I'm strongly seeing myself in law school in 2 years' time, and graduating after then. So I moved to New York City here. I am recently I've done some work around. Was a law that called Walk and Ride Trans Ban. We've done advocacy around there through the Caribbean Equality Projects and other organizations here. I haven't put down my activism. I determined that I will continue advocating for the things that I care about: sex workers, decriminalizing marijuana, decriminalizing LGBT experience and existence, Black lives, and just fighting against oppression in everywhere. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, Twinkle, for sharing your experience, sharing who you are, taking the time to do this. It is an excellent and I think very inspirational reflection of your own experience. Do you have time to spend maybe to just engage in a couple of questions as I've been asked? Is that okay? Not to engage too much on what we call trauma talk, but if you can tell me, after hearing your transition in terms of being part of a legal system in the Caribbean, looking on at that process to where we are now, what does that mean for healing, for closure, knowing that the laws have been deemed as unconstitutional? What does that mean for your own personal healing, hearing that so many years later?
Well, for me, it meant a lot for me. It showed the magistrate that he didn't win at no point in time, even though he excluded me from the courtroom. But it kind of bring closure that this law wouldn't affect me, but then also it had more impact on me for my community, because I know many of my community members would not dare stand up to a magistrate and resist a magistrate and fight the magistrate in the way I did, right? For many reasons, out of fear and stuff like that. And that was the most happiest moment for me, because I know my sisters would be safe now. And also I also know, but that's not enough. We still got a long more way to go. But for me, I felt like, yes, we won, but also it was greater for the benefit of my community.
Excellent. And I think it's important that, we hear during this Pride Month, where queer and LGBT issues are at its heightened. Is there anything you want, not just in the internal movement of the LGBT and plus, but also allies and external communities, supportive communities? Is there anything that you would want them to focus, highlight as it relates to trans issues, migrant trans issues? Is there anything that you would want us to kind of, focus on in the month of Pride?
I think so. Like I said yesterday, I don't know if you see it, but my message for Pride, or my focus for this year Pride, is just remembering that our trans ancestor Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, started Pride as a protest, and we must not stop protesting. And to do this, we need allies, we need resources, we need community support, and we also need love. And all I need us to do is don't settle for the little bit that they give us, and don't stop until every LGBT person can live their life and enjoy life freely like everybody else.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Twinkle, for sharing that with us. It's excellent to see you doing awesome work, pushing forward. Resilience is really multifaceted. It is excellent to hear these inspirational movements. And I do hope that in the nearest of future, that these don't become conversations that we had, that we could only focus on potential and possibilities rather than oppressions and obstacles. So thank you so much, Twinkle, for spending this little time with us. Next up, folks, we are going to, we all know that drag-centric activism exists in the Caribbean. It stems way back from the time of Molly and other Indo-Caribbean drag performers who have done work in non-traditional spaces. We've seen drag shows become places of healing and camaraderie and community. And now we are going to look at another dynamic personality, Fearless Queen, who personifies art, performance, community, talent. Let us please enjoy the entertainment of drag artist and activist Sinduri, the Indian goddess.
ये निगाहें नश्तर, ये होंठ कौसर, मेरी आगोश में होश भी बेहोश होगा।
ये किसकी है आहट, ये किसका है साया, हुई दिल में दस्तक, यहाँ कौन आया। Tom tanana dere no, tom tanana dere na tadare. Just a wine, just a little wine. Ain't no harm in that, right? Cause we having a good time. We everybody. Wine up somebody now. Take a wine, everybody. Wine up somebody now. A little wine never hurt nobody. So take a wine. A little wine never hurt nobody. So take a wine. A little wine never hurt nobody. So take a wine. A little wine never hurt nobody. So take a wine.
Hey, pull up. Sound a bounce and the place a full up. Sexy girl, now me can't get enough. Girl a good on pie, that me love. I murder when me step in at the club. Select that on the top in the soul. Music a bounce and lyrics by the tons and the high grade sent from above. We tell them. Hey, watch out for this. 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 And the maddest lyrics. Mash up the place, push you on up for this. Yo, me nah miss number one funny list. The girl them a twist waistline can't miss.
When I start to whine, start to whine, start to whine, hold on tight. When I go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, hold on tight. When I roll my waist, roll my waist, roll my waist, hold on tight. When I go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, hold on tight. Start to whine, start to whine, start to whine, hold on tight. When I go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, hold on tight. Hold on tight. Hold on. Buckle up, buckle up. Hold on.
2015 was that first meeting. Then there was a second meeting in 2017 that further developed on that. And part of this was looking at, everybody was speaking about litigation, but what did litigation look like for the Eastern Caribbean? But we have attempted to ensure that every organization that we are aware of within the Eastern Caribbean, an invite had been sent for membership. The strategy that had been developed looked at pretty much some of the organizations that we had been working with already in the international arena. But part of the strategy for this region was also to look at not just the fact that we wanted litigation and the change of laws, what was the sustainability plan for the organizations in question, and what was some of the community mobilizing and groundswell that was also needed for additional layers of support, while looking for external funding. And so persons from each of those territories, from these countries, made commitments and decisions that they would come together under this strategy to look at this, whilst we had the lawyers discuss unpacking the laws and telling us and guiding us as to which country would have been more likely to have a positive outcome of a decision if that case was to be filed. Coming out of this, we decided that they were going to have strands of the strategy. Our strategy is not just looking at litigation. Litigation is one strand. Education and advocacy is the second strand. And the third strand is actually security, including mental health. And then the fourth strand is communication and campaigns. This is how the Eastern Caribbean strategy has been set up for the countries. And so any litigation process that has come up for the region, even if we are not involved in it, in terms of the litigation aspect, we have had to come back to the table and rethink what that means for communication and security. When something happens in one country, the impact is up for us all.
excellent. Drag performances, more so, has been part of the artivism world for quite some time, and more so seeing drag done in international spaces, in public, in its mother tongue. It is quite inspirational. It is quite moving, and it has really done what it really wasn't set out to do. Really, drag was just an overdone version of celebrating femininity, but it has really pushed the boundaries of gender, what we know to be acceptable, and really celebrating femininity is really in its own art form. So, and following that performance by Sinduri, we heard from the executive director of the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, just sharing some ways of, again, pushing against the boundaries of oppression and limitations. At this point, folks, allow me to introduce Ryan Pasadi, who will be taking over the other part of this summit, which is the panelist segment. Ryan is a educator, drag artist, and activist, absolutely in his own right, his own style, his own creativity. Ryan will further introduce himself and definitely introduce the panelists as he takes us through the conversation around resilience, healing, and decolonizing our Caribbean identities. So, Ryan, all yours. You're on mute, Ryan.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much, Marcus, and thanks so much, everyone, for being here today, and for also big thanks to Mohammed for asking me to be part of this conversation today entitled Diversity and Resilience Through Healing and Transformative Justice. I'm super excited to be able to moderate this conversation and be in conversation with all the incredible and important work that is going on in the Caribbean and in the Caribbean diaspora. So today we have Kenita, co-founder and executive director of the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality. We have Mohammed Huamin, who's the founder and executive director of the Caribbean Equality Project. Jason Jones, who is an international LGBTQ human rights defender. Alexa Devi-Hoffman, who a trans advocate and human rights defender. Gareth Henry, I'm an executive director at the Black Coalition for AIDS Prevention, otherwise known as Black Cap, and a senior program officer at Rainbow Railroad, and Veronica Sanak, lawyer based in St. Lucia. Again, as I said, my name is Ryan. I'm a PhD student at the University of Toronto. I'm also a drag artist. I go by the name of Tifa Wine, and I'm also a cultural researcher and board member with the Caribbean Equality Project. And with that, I think we can get started. I'm just waiting to see if everyone else is coming up. Hi, everyone. I can't hear everyone yet, so I'm not sure if mics are muted.
Oh, hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
How are we all doing?
Good.
Bastante bien.
Amazing. So I'm just making sure.
Somewhat okay in Spanish for those who weren't quite clear.
So I'll just say, just for sake of to give everyone space to talk so we're not talking over each other, is that maybe just when you are not talking, remove your mic so that we can give everyone a chance to speak as things come up. But before I get to that, I'm just gonna share a land acknowledgement, and particularly I think this is important in the Caribbean as well as in the Caribbean diaspora. For those that are based in Canada, there was some news a couple of days ago where 200 something of bodies of Indigenous children were found on the site of a residential school. And so I think it's really important for us, for those that are both settlers and non-settlers, to think about the land in which we're currently positioned as ongoing Indigenous genocide is always happening. On behalf of the Caribbean Equality Project, we wish to acknowledge the land we are situated on. That includes, but is not limited to, sites we now call Toronto, New York City, Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, and the list goes on. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Lenape, Rockaway, and Canarsie communities, as well as the Kalinago, Taino, Lakono, Akawayo, Arasinu, Makusi, Waro, Wapisiana, Waiwai, Patamona, and Kalina peoples, to name just a few. These indigenous communities have lived on these lands since time immemorial, survived genocide and forced relocation by imperial powers. The Caribbean Equality Project acknowledges that it was founded upon the death, exclusions, and erasures of many indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this action is occurring on and organizes on, respectively. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. As we are positioned in a time of ongoing pandemic and precarity and largely continue to digitally gather as non-Indigenous, Indigenous, and settler communities, it is important to be reminded of our commitment to solidarity, coalition, and decolonization efforts in support of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. So just to begin today's conversation, we've just not today, but we've been seeing these ongoing conversations specifically to anti-buggery laws that are happening in the Caribbean and these colonial continuities of legislation that particularly harm Korean trans folk in the region. And so I'm interested, just to begin, to hear from everyone a little bit about some of the work that they're doing in response to some of these cases or challenges to constitutional discrimination in the region. And if for anyone that would like to speak, if you could also maybe contextualize a little bit about how those anti-buggery laws are being practiced or non-practiced or challenged, or how they have come about in the particular area you were situated. I think that would also be useful, just because these things change from place to place and from country to country. So I think that would be helpful. And with that, whoever would like to start us off first.
Yeah, I'm fine to start. I like to take in front. So, just to introduce myself briefly, my name is Veronica Snack. I am many hats in a sense. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition and one of the founding members from 2004, with people like Gareth, who is also on the panel. I actually serve on the board of the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, or now the HIV Legal Network, for the last 6 years, going off this year. Serve not on the board, but a very active member in ECAID, AIDS Action Foundation, and many other organizations at the expert panels for the UN, etc., and UNAIDS in particular. One of the questions you asked, Ryan, was about our colonial laws. In fact, the Caribbean, we have a similar culture across the region in terms of where these laws came from. Most of it was imported under the Offences Against the Person Act in Britain in the 1800s. So Jamaica's law is still very reflective of even the language of that period of time. But we have a range of offenses. So we have buggery in some cases, and in other cases it's a natural offenses. In some cases it is linked with bestiality. So whoever commits a natural offense, either with man or with an animal, that's how the law is framed in Jamaica is an example of that. In Belize was also an example of that. So that's how some of our laws are framed, but they all come from the same place. There have been some distinctions. So in some countries, buggery is defined as, there's no distinction between whether it's a male and a female and a male, and in some countries it's only limited to males. So where the law has been struck down in the countries where it is both sexes, then it also has an impact for the range of communities. So not just the gay community, but also trans community, etc. In other countries, it doesn't have that it will not have that same effect. So we are very strategic in the region in terms of how we have brought the cases, in terms of the parties who are the persons who are parties to the cases, particularly in the Eastern Caribbean. We have sought to ensure that we have litigants who fall into all of the categories who may be affected by the law, so that we anticipate when the laws are struck down in the Eastern Caribbean, we don't have any decisions in the Eastern Caribbean yet, that it will apply across the board. It will be clear that the law and its impact on not just the gay community, but also the trans community where it applies is also effective. And I will let somebody else continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Would anyone else like to add anything? Kenita, I'm not sure if you're talking. The mic is off.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I think when we look at the work that has been done on the ground, and pretty much we have to give thanks to, I think, two icons of the Caribbean that we have lost. One is Robert Carr, the other one, Colin Robinson, and they have others probably whose names are not being listed here today. But I think the vision of this kind of work in this region really thinking through what litigation means, thinking about how do we actually challenge the law. But I think in order for us to understand that, we also had to understand how to change how we saw ourselves. And so having that conversation around access to different services was actually the gateway to having conversations around LGBT persons for a very long time. And if I think pre-2006, you found a number of organizations that had any type of visibility was actually talking about HIV and HIV education. And in between that, actually started dealing with MSMs, which is men sleeping with men. So we have organizations which were under the radar, which got registered in 2005 and 2006, 2003, but really hid behind foundations such as AIDS Action Foundation in St. What this has done is actually make certain citizens of a country invisible, but it also increased the vulnerability of such citizens. And so as we think about how those laws were written, constantly having people like Veronica Snack, Westman James, Tracy Robinson, continuously doing the explanation of the law and how it's interpreted or how it is used was something that civil society needed almost consistently in order for them to understand even how for them to move forward. And so I think this is, when we think about it, a decade gone. A decade ago, we had basically no cases. And now in this decade, we're probably seeing 6, 7, 8 cases that are coming up almost among every country that currently have a law. So when we think about the Commonwealth, we think about the Commonwealth having 54 nations, of which 34 criminalize same-sex behavior. Of those 34, 11 are right here in this region. And so it's really good to see representation, Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, knowing that we are actually sharing the experience, we are sharing the journey, and we are sharing knowledge in terms of what has worked and what hasn't.
I would also want to chime in a little on following what Veronica and just talk about and highlight. And I think the time is now for litigation, and it's like Kenneth just said, many organizations started working with the LGBT community under the guise of HIV, right? And I think it kind of, to an extent, whilst it was convenient and worked in the early years, I think we have to start to break away from that. And we're seeing much more of that happening now, where the issue around LGBTQ takes forefront and is separated, and that distinction between it and HIV is made clear. That what we're actually advocating for are the basic fundamental human rights for LGBTQ folks, across the Caribbean. And and as I said, it's in the last 10 years, I've seen a lot of that pieces around litigation happening. And it's also for community members and organizations to continue to come forward and to do this work, because the change that we're seeking is not just going to happen. We have to continue to be forceful. Just a part of it, again, is tied into the fact that in terms of even us as Black people, right, and Caribbean people, or Blackness has been challenged, just as how the fact that as queer folks, we're also being challenged and continue to be pushed back into the box. So both go hand in hand. And as Black queer folks, across the Caribbean and in the diaspora, it is critical time for us to start to harness our skills and talent together, and to band together and to do this work. It's like for me, I speak from the comfort of the North, not that we experience homophobia and transphobia here in Canada and racism. but it's the fact that as I speak from this place, of safety, is that I also have to be conscious of the fact that as my activism has to also be based in ongoing communication and engagement with those on the ground, with other organizations in the Caribbean who are doing the work, because we can truly be free, and we'll only truly be free if all of us are free, right? And so the freedom that I experience in living in North America, is when I travel outside of the comfort of Canada, am I truly free, right? And can I talk about gay rights and the fact that I'm free to be my authentic self? And that is not consistently true. But the freedom that we see is the freedom that is universal, where all of us can go wherever we choose to go and to be our authentic self. And so we can create that world by supporting each other, supporting the work on a consistent basis, and through litigation, which is very important and crucial, because the laws that criminalizes or seek to dictate who I love are these laws that really need to change.
Thank you so much. Just if we could hear from Jason. Jason, do you have anything that you'd like to add here?
Good evening, everyone. And I am so proud to be a part of this conversation. I've been listening, and I do have a couple of things to say about the comments made by the previous people, which is this. Firstly, I disagree with the activism that says that we cannot challenge these laws based upon our own gender identity and our own sexual orientation. One of the things that I achieved in my victory in Trinidad and Tobago at the High Court was the decriminalization of the Sexual Indecency Act, which criminalized acts of lesbianism. And I don't understand why this has not been recognized by the activists in the Caribbean, because in the courtroom, the advocate for the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago said to the judge, Mr. Jones cannot challenge the Sexual Indecency Act, Section 16, because he does not have a vagina. And the judge said, no, I understand what Mr. Jones is doing. He is fighting for his community. And I think that we have to start working in a much broader sense about this work. It's not about who we are personally as an individual. It's about fighting for the freedom of our entire community. And I have not seen the community in the Caribbean pulling together. And I totally agree with Gareth, what he said about how do we pull together as a community. I think this is one of the stumbling blocks that we have to face and we have to address. We have issues around race, about colonialization, about slavery, indentured laborship. All of these things are part of this conversation. And I think we don't have this conversation happening effectively within our own community. I see a lot of the advocacy being focused by queer people of Afro-Caribbean descent in the Caribbean, and the rest of us are being left behind. And I feel that lesbians, trans people are being left behind. I feel that we are not engaging enough with our minority communities within our minority. Right now, I am in a huge discussion about trans rights, the Gender Recognition Act here in the United Kingdom. These are all things that I think play an important part in who we are as a community. And these are conversations that we need to engage with as a community and find a way forward so that all of us can sit at the table and find our rights for equality. And I don't see this happening. I think we have to understand that our own internal prejudices are stopping us from moving forward. And I want to, my point of being here tonight is to hear that conversation start to happen.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm just going to go next to Alexa, if Alexa's ready.
Yes. I was actually looking to speak right after Jason, and I'm very glad that he did. Because he brought up something that hits directly to home for me as a trans person, as a trans woman of color. Because it has been my experience. I have been involved in advocacy for about roughly 8-9 years now. And I've had many situations where, as a trans woman who has dealt with what I, for lack of better words, coined the term homophobia ad extensionem, or extended homophobia, where it reached beyond just gay men and lesbians and bisexuals, and it also slapped in the face of trans people as well. I dealt with that, and with it I dealt with workplace discrimination. I've dealt with social ostracism and whatnot, and in many instances, when I come into certain spaces and I start to speak from where I'm standing, from what I've felt, from what I've seen, I often find myself saying, this needs to change, that needs to change. We need to see more of this and less of that. And regrettably, it seems like words fall on deaf ears when they come out of my mouth. So it leads to a situation where a lot of those advocates, a lot of those community members who are not being heard, they're not being listened to, or they're otherwise, for whatever reason, they're not being accounted for, it causes a level of burnout. And so when I saw the theme, which was healing and transformative justice, the healing part really stuck out at me, because we have to be looking at healing not just in the physical sense, not just in the social sense, but also on the mental health aspect. When you're dealing, as a trans person, you're dealing with whether it's a discomfort with your body as it would appear as you've grown up with it from birth coming right up, whether it is a discomfort with social roles and gender norms and gender roles, whether it is your own discomfort and challenges as you transition and try to adjust and reassimilate yourself into the world as you have always seen yourself. There is a level of healing that it never ends. It's more like you're renting a bed in the hospital rather than just there for a short stay. Because as soon as you deal with one thing, you then have to heal with another. And also, as I'm listening to what Veronica said and what Jason said and what I can't remember the name of the other person said, as it related to litigation and the laws and how they've worked, I personally have taken it upon myself to do extensive research on the history of particularly the anti-sodomy laws. And these laws, I understand, Veronica, what she's saying about there being something that would have come about from around the 1800s. I'd have to actually correct her and say it goes far beyond that, almost 500 years, all the way back to 1533, when during the time of King Henry VIII, he would have drafted and passed what I understand to be the first known anti-buggery law. It was literally called the Buggery Act of 1533. And from that understanding, the mechanisms, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but understanding the mechanisms of that law, how it was used, who it targeted, and how it punished those whom were found guilty under that law. And we're coming all the way through. I've seen one common factor right up to the current era buggery laws that we're trying to challenge here in Barbados, and that were recently challenged and struck down in Belize and Trinidad, and that are also being dealt with in other territories. And the main commonality is simply to disenfranchise people, to just strip them of all that they are, in some cases all that they're worth, and reduce them to how should I put it? Reduce them to, for lack of better words, cockroach status. You're not welcome. You're not wanted. You're seen as a threat, a liability, a problem. And like I said, when you heap that onto the plate of what trans people have to deal with, and I keep coming back to trans people because that's me. It is really an immense burden. So coming back around to what Jason was mentioning with trans people and gender nonconforming people not being accounted for, as we try to go through this healing and transformative justice mission, we need to look more at not just dealing with the buggery laws, but also social equity, equitable treatment, ensuring that where damage has been done in the past, their efforts to repair the damage, their efforts to, and when I say compensate, I'm not just saying, I'm not talking about financial compensation, but also the emotional compensation, doing what is necessary to make sure that that person is not suffering from any hurt they've already experienced and that they don't experience additional hurt or injury. So I'm going to wrap up my point here by saying when we go through our various levels of advocacy, there needs to be a more open ear and a more open mind being given to the trans and gender nonconforming community, non-binary people, because at the end of the day, yes, there are challenges faced by the lesbian, gay, and bisexual communities. But when it comes to trans, non-binary, gender nonconforming, intersex people, we often feel the brunt of it all because we're not just dealing with the same things that you're also dealing with as lesbian, gay, bisexual people, but we also have our own challenges, and then we're further made invisible because people still to this day are not getting a clear idea of what it's like to be us and what we experience from day to day. So I'll just let the others add on, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Alexa. I think all of these comments are really helping us to think about a lot of so things I was just thinking about and thinking about this conversation is about, I mean, it's also Pride Month this month, right? And so all the companies now, everyone apparently is, LGBTQ friendly and is an ally because they're making money, so they have to be. But I want us to also think about this sort of complication with because we're talking about the global north, the global south, and sort of the politics that revolve around those sorts of geographies and those particular sites of spaces, right? Twinkle was just talking about how she was asked or told that she should leave, right, from the Caribbean and go to the diaspora. And there's this common notion in the global north, particularly around the upper middle class white kind of imaginary, that the Caribbean is this site of ultimately queer death, queer and trans death. It's the most homophobic place in the world. And then we see these sort of mainstream queer politics that particularly are exacerbated during Pride, where you have to do things like come out of the closet to be seen as a real queer, right? You have to, if you're trans, you have to be passing. You have to be visible, right? The visibility politics that come around with this. You have to conform to sexual identity categories. You have to fit into a box, right? And I think the Caribbean has taught us historically and today that they don't play by those rules ever, right? And the Caribbean emerges from its inception as this site of disruption, as this site of challenged normativity, as this site of transgression. And so I also want to think about the strategies and the techniques and the practices that we must take in our organizing initiatives to think about those who cannot leave the Caribbean, to think about those people that are always caught in places of refusal. What does it mean to refuse a gay identity politic? What does it mean to refuse to pass? And particularly going back to what Alexa just spoke about, I also want us to think about, again, trans people and gender nonconforming people and non-binary people, again, who we saw this prior to COVID, but now with COVID, we're seeing these extremely escalated rates of trans misogyny, of homelessness, of violence that are happening all across the Caribbean, but also in the Caribbean diaspora. And so now that we're caught in this state of economic disparity, colliding pandemics, escalated rates of death and violence, how then do we develop the techniques and resources to be able to deal with these complications And when I say complications, I mean, on the one hand, these streams of flow from the global north to the global south that tell us how we should be queer and how we should organize. But then at the same time, how do we deal with COVID, right? And the conditions that it has brought in our discussions of what it means to be proud or what it means to be queer and all these sorts of things. And again, we can do this for the next question. Maybe a follow-up would also help us to think about healthcare, right? And how do we do the things that we need to do so that people are safe and taken care of and can live the most fulfilling lives that they can during COVID with all these other challenges around us. I know that's a very loaded question and there's a lot of things I said there, but for anyone, feel free to just chime in with anything I've just brought up to the table. And I think Mo just wants to start us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mohammed Q. Amin. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. I'm the founder and executive director of the Caribbean Equality Project. And Ryan, thank you for this question. I'm not going to comment on the litigation and the constitutional question because I have diasporic privilege and I'm going to leave that comment with all of our regional folks. But in terms of COVID-19, for us in New York City, and in terms of having laws that protects LGBTQ people, we know that laws don't protect LGBTQ people. We still experience violence. We are still being attacked here, right here in New York City. The Caribbean Equality Project was founded in 2015 after my brother survived a hate crime incident that took place in 2013. So laws don't protect us, but it helps with litigation and it helps with bringing our perpetrator to justice, right? For many of us here in New York City, the work that we do with Caribbean Equality Project, COVID-19 simply forced us to transform and reimagine what serving LGBTQ immigrants looks like in New York City. Many of our undocumented folks were forced into being automatically jobless, no income, no source of income. We had to now transform what our organizing looked like and respond to issues that we don't even have the infrastructure to respond to, such as food justice work. And we've been doing this by appealing to our community to support our undocumented Caribbean community members. And for many of our asylum seekers, the laws in the Caribbean does play a role in why people migrate to places like New York City. And if they're fleeing for violence or if they're migrating for economic reasons, it's all valid. If we cannot sustain ourselves in the Caribbean and we have to leave, that is a valid reason to leave because we cannot be forced into situations where we're going to be harmed. And I've seen this argument on social media. I've seen leaders of Caribbean organizations that says they don't support asylum or they are not supporting anybody that's coming to New York for economic reasons or traveling outside of the Caribbean for economic reasons. And to those folks, I say to you, that's not what organizing looks like. If we cannot find a job, if we cannot pay our bills, if we cannot find housing, if we cannot get a job because our ID or gender marker on our ID doesn't affirm who we identify as, we have to leave. And if you want to label that as being leaving because of economic reasons, absolutely. Let our community leave to find safety so they can thrive as LGBTQ people. And in New York City, that's exactly what we've been doing with our undocumented LGBTQ members and our asylum seekers. We have been rent negotiating with landlords to keep our communities safe so they can avoid any type of harassment. Because many of our community folks in New York City who are undocumented do not qualify for any of the government aids. All of the stimulus checks that people have been talking about, the unemployment benefits, our Caribbean LGBTQ community members have been living for over a year and a half without any government aid. So our pop-up pantries that we've been doing, creating spaces for communities to access food during the pandemic has been essential. Creating opportunities for folks to seek mental health services have been essential. Creating space for community to access hormone therapy, to continue having access to equitable healthcare has been essential. And these are all things that pre-COVID we talk about as organizers, and we create programs that specifically focuses on these services. But during COVID, and COVID still is real, for many folks of us, it is still very much real, even here in New York City, our community have been dealing with colliding pandemics while also dealing with the racial justice issues, particularly in New York City. And we've seen it escalated in parts of the Caribbean as well. So when we talk about COVID, when we talk about community safety, when we talk about community resilience, we also have to do this from a grassroots, ground-up level. We have to focus on protecting and loving our most vulnerable community members. And when we talk about making sure that no one gets left behind, it includes our sex workers. It includes the folks who are living in countries that are undocumented. It includes folks who need hormone therapy but cannot afford it. So they have to find other means to have access to hormone therapy. And my sister, Raven Gill, said it beautifully yesterday. We need solutions. We need solutions at the community level. We have to start with our community. We can challenge legislations, or we can create and introduce legislations. But if our community is not with us, these changes that the legislation will make will not protect our community members.
Clyde, I would just like to follow on with what Mohammed just said, and I say but you just talk about what is so impactful, Mohammed, and it's you go back to again the piece around grassroots work, and and also the piece you talk about in terms of folks fleeing from the Caribbean and seeking opportunities for themselves to be safe and also to balance their lives as it relates to economics. And and one other thing for us within for those leaders and those activists within with our own communities who are so against folks seeking asylum and refugee protection, it's we have to be very mindful that our community, our LGBTQ community, is also a reflection of a broader community in which we live. That's where we're drawn from. And some of us as queer folks who have privilege, we have resources, I have a job, I have a place to live, that kind of stuff, and the list goes on and on. So I can name and acknowledge my privilege. And oftentimes I see so many activists who forget that sometimes our activism, we do that from the comfort of our homes, but there's quite a few activists who sleep on the streets, who are homeless, who go hungry, who don't have a 9-to-5 job, who don't have a source of income. And and so it's we have to find, as you say, Mohammed, ways to, our activism have to be balanced, where it supports those who are most vulnerable among us. We can't expect the system, the society, to take care of our brothers and sisters, because already, please note, we are not loved, we are hated by the mass. And so we have to be our brother's keeper. We have to be the vanguards for those who are the most vulnerable amongst us. And when I fled to Canada in 2008, and I sought refugee protection, my commitment to my community was that for those who will not survive until the laws are changed in Jamaica, I will help. I got aligned and got involved with this Rainbow Railroad, and to date we have moved over 500 Jamaicans since 2008 across. Some have relocated to the US, Canada, and across Europe. That's what activism looks like. It's about how do we take care of those who are among us who can't take care of themselves, who live on the streets. And so when we look, and I'm very mindful that getting people out of the country do not change the laws. It don't create the society, the freedoms that we want. It means for those who have the resources and are able to remain and survive and to do the work, let's do that. That's our contribution, right? We're not pleading on all of us to leave and pack up and leave our home countries. No, that is not a practical solution. But there are so many among us that is their only source of survival, and that's the only thing that they can do. And I think for most of them, when they move to a safer place, they get involved and they want to give back and they want to create that change in their home country, because they have lived it and have experienced it. And I speak from a place of my own personal experience. And so, we talk about COVID, and during the pandemic and my work with Rainbow Railroad, we find that there are so many queer folks who end up being forced into unsafe living situations because now they're jobless, the quarantines, you're forced to be home more now with your homophobic family members. People get outed during the period of COVID. People become homeless, suicidal, and the list goes on and on. And so, the responsibility that for us as activists that we have at our hands is that, and we who are situated in the global north, is being able to work together as a collective. We're seeing it's Pride Month, and we see all the corporate organizations across North America coming out, and everybody's talking about diversity. And I always say, diversity is not having one black person or one gay person or lesbian here or trans person involved. That's not diversity. Diversity runs deeper than that. And so you get a poster boy or poster girl or trans person as a poster person. Oh, we're diverse. And we suck that up as a community. And we now need to start to push back on using pride as a political platform to say to the corporate sponsors, this is not what it looks like. Don't come give me $10,000 now to run down the street to promote your product, whatever it is, and then talk about inclusion or gay. There is systematic change that needs to happen. After the month of June ends, what happens? The guys go back homeless, right here in Canada, right there in New York City, everywhere across the world this happens. And we take it as activists. But go ahead, Jason.
But Gareth, I think this conversation, if we're talking about a Global South Summit, we have to bring this conversation home. What I want to hear happening this evening is about how do we bridge Global North diaspora queer people and Global South diaspora queer people. We have created a hatred between us. How do we build a bridge between us? That's the conversation I want to hear tonight.
Yeah, and Jason, I was coming to that, right? Because it goes back to, if we here in the North are becoming political about pride itself, we're going to talk about, there's World Pride. We talk about that on a broader scale to say, how do we include queer folks in the South, right? And then be able to see how do we then, as activists and as true activists, cultivate and harness support and resources to support and facilitate the change in those kind of locations. But also, we have to be guided by the organizations on the ground doing the work to work together.
I have to disagree with you, because the organizations in Trinidad and Tobago did not support my case for decriminalization. They actually actively worked against it.
No. Jason, I think you have to say it as it is. I think Veronica is trying to get a word in before I take this on. Sorry, Veronica is trying to get the floor before Jason jumped in.
I hear what you're saying, Jason. I just want to, because you see, we must never fight with each other. We don't fight with each other. But one thing about community is that we may disagree, but we are never going to fight, right? Your case is seminal, and the fact that you were able to do the case when you were out of Trinidad is something that was good. Praise God, because to find an activist in Trinidad may not have been possible, and that is what you bring to the process. And I know that the people in Trinidad were problematic. I don't disagree. I know the situation very well. I know about the situation in every Caribbean country, more or less. However, what you did is everybody is grateful, Jason, and you are a hero in the eyes of most Caribbean people. Though you will be criticized, and that's fine. What we need in the Caribbean is to ensure that what is done in the Caribbean does not continue to harm the communities. In ECAID, we have a principle of do no harm. So pride and certain activities, as it happens in the global north, may not be able to happen in the same way in the global south. When you file a case, we're not going to be on the media and talking to all and sundry and having press releases all over the place. We're not going to do that. We have come to a place, Jason, and Alexa is a hero because she lives in Barbados and she has to face people all the time because we are small communities. We're not Jamaica, and there are distinctions. We're not Jamaica, and we also not Trinidad. Populations of over 1 million. St. Kitts has a population of about 50,000 people. St. Lucia has a population of 170,000 people. We are very small. So we're going to take a young person who is in their 20s who have no resources, no job, and Gareth and Alexis said it very well, who doesn't have any means, and put them to file a case where their lives may be in danger. We have to be able to support asylum. I absolutely agree with Gareth. I advise the Canadian Immigration and Citizenship Board on asylum cases out to the Caribbean, right? And we do other work as well. This have to be done, but to find people in the Caribbean who can do those cases is great. But we cannot take everything that happens in the global north and translate it to the global south. It has
But
to be
Veronica, you are ignoring my own personal experience. I do not live in the Caribbean, not out of choice. I live out of the Caribbean because of fear. I have suffered multiple death threats. I am unsafe in Trinidad and Tobago. This is why I live outside of Trinidad and Tobago, and this is why I was able to do this case from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So please don't paint me as some kind of guy living outside who's doing this from the outside in. I did it from absolute necessity to do this work.
Jason,
can I interject for a moment? Could I interject for a moment?
Just give a second. I will probably just bring this to this point.
I don't like to be Jason, I'm not arguing with you and I'm not disagreeing with you.
I do, but
unfortunately, I'm in a situation where I tend to be very careful about what I say and what I say because I'm not.
I know, but Veronica, I just want you to understand my humanity and the fact that I do have other issues besides my activism.
If I misconstrued or misrepresented your position, that's what I want to say.
Well, all I want to make clear to everybody on this call right now is that I am a human being. I have multiple issues that I'm dealing with, and my activism does not just come from being in a place of privilege, being a person of passing white privilege, being a person of cisgender privilege, being all of those things, right? I have other issues that I do not make public. It's not my job to portray to everybody what my personal issues are. But I have done what I have done for me, not my community, right? I am a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, and I have every right to engage with the government and the judiciary on my own. And I think what we have to understand about activism is that when we talk about what does activism look like, who are the people that gatekeep activism? I fought against the gatekeepers in Trinidad and Tobago who all said, you don't have the right to do this, right? I am not going to listen to gatekeepers. I am going to do what is right for me as a Trinbagonian citizen, a born and bred Trinbagonian. And I think what we have to understand when we're moving forward with the conversation of how activism moves in the Caribbean is we have to engage with everybody's right as a citizen, as a proud citizen of the Caribbean. And I think this is where the NGOization of activism is now starting to attack us. Because when you have an NGO who is saying, well, you can't do that because of all these reasons, it takes the risk away from activism.
Sorry to cut off everyone. Before we move on, can I just say, just because it's hard to hear everyone talk at once, so maybe just to get some clarity, again, just a reminder that when we're talking, if we could just turn off our mics and wait until the next person. I understand this is an important conversation, but I know Veronica's been trying to speak, Kenita's been trying to speak, and Alexa's been trying to speak. So let's maybe just go in that order so they can all get a chance to share their piece. So let's go to Veronica, Kenita, and then Alexa, and then Jason, I'll come back to you.
No, I'm going to defer to the others. I think I spoke. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Veronica. I just wanted to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
Jason, I'll actually speak after Alexa, if that's okay. Ryan, sorry.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to interject because in the midst of the discussion, there was something that it came up, and my memory tends to serve me a bit poorly in recent times. So before I forgot it, I wanted to put in something. I understand exactly what Jason was talking about. In fact, he and I have compared experiences on a number of occasions when it comes to moments where, and I understand, Veronica wanted to emphatically state that it's not supposed to be, for lack of better words, modus operandi to set out to harm, community members or to attack anybody. I also understand what she's saying in terms of, you don't want to put anyone who is not in a position to do something which can, in one way or another, cost them something. However, we need to face the reality. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, there's a Camp Caprice thing going on, because, that would be flat out dishonest. Here's the reality. We in the Caribbean, we have situations where we have community members who may even have the resources that they, if there is a risk posed to them, they can withstand that risk. But yet they don't want to, because in their mind, the risk that is posed to them is far more than they think it is worth to take chances with. So I'll give a fine example, because Veronica mentioned something about taking someone in their 20s with no resources. And I'm like, okay, that sounds almost like me, because I'm only 27. And when I and two other individuals set out to challenge Barbados' Sexual Offences Act at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the legal counsel, the legal team present, they almost pleaded with me to take the option to suppress my own identity. The other two co-petitioners, they had their information redacted. I said, you know what? No. And it wasn't that I was being reckless. It wasn't that I wanted to prove a point. It was, for me, in my mind, I had to process, what could I have risked to lose? And at that time, I didn't think that I could have lost anything. I still don't think that I could lose anything other than the opportunity to enjoy my human rights. And as it stood, as a Black trans woman living in Barbados, readily identifiable, okay, even long before I came out on the forefront, readily identifiable as a member of the LGBTI community, okay, I can't hide that if I tried. And every single movement you make, literally, you have to be considering, the question is in your mind, who is going to try to cause me harm? Who is going to try to harass me? Who is going to try to cause me undue stress, strife, and heartache? And I realized, you know what? With or without this case, I'm still going to have to deal with these things. Okay? With or without getting involved in litigation, with or without challenging, laws, with or without challenging politicians, governments, with or without bucking the system in general, there's still going to be some sort of strife and anxiety that I'll have to experience. Sure enough, just months before we had finalized the case to launch it, I was viciously attacked. I had to spend 12 hours in the accident and emergency department having my nose basically stitched back to my face. And this was something that I had been bracing myself for years. Which day is it that somebody's going to put hands on me and draw blood? And it happened when I least expected it. There are some people that will see what I've gone through and they will say, I don't care how good my situation is. I don't care, how aloof of whatever Alexa's facing. I am not putting myself out there in case that happens to me. There are people who come and they tell me all the time, you're so strong, you're so brave. And I'm like, I'm just trying to get from Monday to Monday. There's nothing strong about that. There's nothing brave about that. I get up, I go, I do what I have to do, and I go to bed. And when it comes to finding people who do litigation, granted, you don't want to put anybody in a position that they can't handle. But then there's some cases where there may be some people who step forward and say, look, I have nothing to lose. And even though there may be people who, like Veronica, are, ever so concerned and vigilant, and they want to save you the harm that you may face, there are going to be some people that they're like, look, it's going to happen one way or the other. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. I'd rather try to do something and take my blows then than not do anything and still be taking blows. Also, what hit home, excuse me, was the issue of not being supported. Because from my experience, and I have been presented with the evidence, there were times where I thought everything was fine, and then I was, inundated with a mob of ton of evidence to realize things are not as you think they are. Where when I was discussing with members of my legal team, how do we go about dealing with this issue? How do we go about dealing with that issue? There were people who were coming forward with every single excuse as to either why it shouldn't be done at all or why I shouldn't do it. But yet these individuals in conversations past, when I, brought up the issue and asked, so what are we going to do about it? There was nary a situation, there was nary a solution coming out of their mouth. I even had an incident that took place involving one of the members of my legal team, where efforts were made to try to have them dismissed from their job because the individual said, well, look, I am willing to support Alexa in whatever she wishes to do. And if she wants to go ahead with it, I am going to go to bat for her to the hilt and higher if necessary. And that displeased some people. There was even a situation where one senior advocate called me into a meeting and tried to manipulate me by saying, don't let XYZ person force you into doing something you're not ready to do, completely unaware that the whole ISCHR thing was something that as soon as I realized there was another avenue to do it other than dealing with the domestic courts, because at the time we didn't have that option available, I said, well, let's go take that. They didn't realize that I had gone and done my own due diligence to the point of getting involved in the OAS and the ISCHR mechanisms, to see how it all worked, to see what was available. And that is something that we need to confront, where we have situations where there are advocates, there are activists, that they wish to try to do something, and for some reason, whether it is somebody, there was a weird saying that I saw in a cartoon: man who spends time looking up tree for falling coconut stubs his head on the trunk. And there's some people that they're so busy watching for falling debris, they're not looking at where they're stepping, and they end up not only stubbing their own toes, but stepping on somebody else's toes. And that is where a lot of friction tends to happen. I was observing in the comments how one person said, we need to step away from this hierarchical approach when it comes to NGOs, and how there's the issue where if you are not a member of a registered NGO, that you have your paperwork to say, we are part of this body corporate, they're not going to listen to you. And that is something that happens throughout this region, even outside of this region. I see it constantly, where people I don't even know, they come to me and they say, look, I'm having this issue, and all I talk, I'm not getting through to people. And that is something that we need to address. If we're going to be talking about healing and transformative justice, we need to, start with that. We need to start with getting out of this air where, we don't want to, we would rather listen constantly to the people who have 10 and 15 and 20 years of experience doing the advocacy, and we don't want to listen to the person who's now walked into the room, because what we do is that we cheat ourselves. Because when you go and ignore the person who's just come into the room, I always believe in a fresh pair of eyes. So that fresh voice, that fresh pair of eyes that's coming into the room, they're going to see something that we've been missing this whole time. They're going to have an experience that we never considered, and I keep reverting back to myself, because at the end of the day, I have to speak for myself. I can't go and speak for somebody else, because I may either get something wrong on their behalf, or I just may not know what they're going through. And the fresh pair of eyes and the new perspective. I've had situations where I thought what I was doing was commonplace, and it turns out you're the only one doing it. Case in point, when I worked as a legal assistant, I actually had another member of the transgender community come to me and tell me, did you know that you're the only person in Barbados who's working in a job that doesn't involve doing hair, doing makeup, or doing sex work? I'm like, huh? Because I thought that, everybody, there was at least at least 5 other people in the transgender community that they had a position as an office assistant or something like that. And it turned out, no, not really. And so, you know, we need to get as many perspectives as possible involved in the advocacy when it comes to dealing with some of these cases. If there's someone who wants to come forward and say, you know what, I'm okay with my name being published, I'm okay with my face being put up there, you know, give the benefit of the doubt that they're not trying to make a name for themselves, but they're actually trying to put a face to what LGBTI advocacy is and who the LGBTI community is. Because another issue that I observe, and I'm slightly off topic here, another issue that I observe is that when a lot of these advocacy efforts go on, there are people, more particularly those who are opposed to the community being able to enjoy their human rights. They get up and they paint this portrait of, you know, social elites, the rich and wealthy who are bored with all their assets and decide to come and create trouble. So there's this Mr. Big, if you were, or Miss Big, if you were, that is said to be using hundreds and thousands and however much in dollars or whatever currency you use to try to subvert the country, when really it's a simple matter of, you know, a 20-something-year-old trans woman or a 32-year-old gay man or a 19-year-old lesbian that has just decided, you know what, I want better for myself, I want better for my friends, I want better for my community, and I'm gonna, you know, put my neck out there if I have to, because he or she or whoever may be in a position where they're looking around and it doesn't seem to be anybody, you know, willing to do it. There's a bystander effect. Somebody's got to do something. And if it's the most unlikely person to step forward and do it, let them do it. Don't hold them back. I mean, yes, if you have your concerns, express your concerns. But if that person says, you know what, I have to, that is the point where you say, all right, if you believe you have to, well, then let us know what help you need. And we will try to, you know, we will try to walk with you through the process. And that's what we need going on. So those were things that popped up in my mind when I heard Jason mention his challenges. And I think that is something that needs to be put there as food for thought for any and everyone on this panel and listening.
I think there are a number of things brought to the table, and I think it's very, very important to recognize each individual stand in their own space. Each individual comes from a place that every time we engage somebody, we have to figure out where they stand, where they are. Can we meet them where they are, or are we trying to move them to where we are? And I think there are a number of things that call into question tonight. One, as we advocate on behalf of community, we know that there is a place that looks at I, but we look at we look at us. And there is a continuous filter through which decision is the best decision at every single step. Every action taken is not necessarily a simple one. It's not a simple decision. And I remember, and I will share this openly, I remember a few years ago being asked to bring cases forth in the Caribbean. Bring a case in St. Lucia. Do I know activists who are willing to? We didn't decide to bring a case. We decided to host a regional meeting in 2015 that says international organizations as well as activists, come to the table, let's discuss this. What are our options? What are the laws? And that's what I was actually speaking about in the video previously when it says we had a meeting in 2015 and in 2017 to discuss this. Because whilst we were thinking about the burden of the truth, the burden of the challenge, the burden of who is going to step forth and put their name to this, one of the lessons learned from Bailey's case, where Caleb had his teeth knocked out, his family was in constant fear of his life. The very same situation that Jason just spoke of, where being in London is out of necessity for his safety, is the same thing we have to consider on a daily. St. Lucia is one of the smallest countries in the Caribbean. Yet we have had almost 9 gay men murdered, tortured. That was friends who came to my house, who drank with me, who lined with me, who never got a chance to actually be themselves because they perceive sexuality cost them their life. So when we take on litigation and we ask people to put themselves forward, I take it as I take it hard, because to me, I am asking somebody, are you interested to put yourself forward? If yes, it means your life, if your life is in danger, if your livelihood is in danger, if your security is in danger, if your family is in danger, I feel it's on me. Because I have accepted your willingness to put yourself out there. Now, every organization operates differently. There's a difference between saying I and saying community. And when someone says, are we ready? I would ask, how much mobilizing have been done? Is the community ready to engage? Because one of the things I learned as an activist, and it was not about gatekeeping, as a matter of fact, I challenged those who were gatekeeping, was every time I went to the media, and at the time we were not even talking about litigation, we were talking about just the need for community acceptance, just the need for people to change how they see gay people. A knife was put under my throat and told me never to be on television to talk about MSM things again. One day I was walking down the street, someone drove their vehicle up to me and said, this is how I can kill you. The next time I see you on my TV, you'll be a dead woman. I'm still in St. Lucia. But these are some, and these are just the tip of the icebergs that I have dealt with, not even being a litigant, not even saying that I'm challenging the law. But I have been the person who have helped parents because they lost their sons. I have been the person who have had to speak out in communities and speak to governments as to why this is necessary. And I'll jump from country to country at any time necessary. When Jason Jones launched this case, guess what? I was in Trinidad. I met with him and said, Jason, what are you doing? How are you doing what? And regardless of him feeling that the community did not support him, the leader of one of the organizations said to me, at the moment, we cannot sign on to this case, but every single person have the right to access the courts. And Jason Jones have the right to access the courts, quote unquote. I'm not taking it from somebody else. So even if there wasn't that immediate jump on board, there was the part that said, when you took this case to court and then community became endangered, when community was then at the forefront of this because the churches started coming out and behavior started changing, community showed up. You had community there. And the same thing with Caleb. When he started this case, he felt like a lone ranger because he was the face of this. But in the background, they had people consistently working, and we have to call it what it is. We are willing to support. How is the support coming? And if it's not in the front line, if it's not visible, do you see it as support? What does support look like? And I think we have to call it, we have to look at it. Because as we move forward, we have to look at how we are also invisibilizing people who are supporting us and saying that we have no support. That's also something we have to take into consideration. Litigation is not easy. Moving organizations from their fear to action is not easy. It does not come from yes to, from no to yes in an automatic. But what is happening is, as activists on the ground, you consistently trying to toe the line between, we want this, but how do we not close that door? We have to try to toe that line to government, but still toe it to our organization, still toe it to the people who is going to come and tell us their parents put them out. They don't have money to go to school. They have an appointment to go to a job and they don't have a black pants. They need a haircut. It goes as basic as this, as we talk about being able to support community. Now, changing the law is a big thing. It is a big thing. Gareth could tell you it was a big win. It felt great getting that that decision from the ICH. Jason Jones, you came out of that courtroom with your hands up, but you had community outside waiting to support you because we had to tell the churches go back with what they were coming with. But at the end of the day, when that joy is done, the reality of what we just did sinks in. Who have a job tomorrow? Who have a place to live tomorrow? Who have transportation money tomorrow? Who have to think that they have to pass a gap which some nigger might come up and just put a knife at them? People, let's deal with the reality. There is something we want. There is something we need. We need to love us. We need our freedom. We need access to justice and services and the whole 9 yards like any other citizen. But for you to enjoy it, you have to be alive. Unless you're one of those that's willing to give your life for the cause. And for 20 plus years, I've been willing to give my life to the cause. And then one day I woke up and say, shit, I don't want to give my life to the cause. I want to enjoy the fruits of the cause. So we have to come down to the basics and look at how are we really moving? What do we really want? How do we really want it? When Barbados government say they bring in the labor law, I remember calling up Equals and say, we need to move on this. We need to move on this. Why do we need to move on it? Because it left out gender identity in 2020. In 2020, after all the hard work, we wrote to the minister, we called the minister, we did the back work. They said to us, based on the work that have been done. And I said, Lord, I understand. And it's not the idea of leaving out gender identity at any point. I, Kenita Placid, identify as a non-binary person. And if any of you know me for all the years, at any meeting, you'd always hear me say, I really don't have a pronoun. I don't like labels. If anybody could tell me they ever hear me identify as a lesbian or anything else, please show me the recording, show me the proof. Because I've always been on that binary. I just didn't know what to call it. When I fully understood it and I actually started being me, people in our own community started challenging, why now? And they thought that today I'm a non-binary because I want to bring more money to the organization. That within the community disrespecting me and disrespecting my self-identification. Yet talk about embracing community. No, we have to put the devils out there. Let's do work on ourselves. When we talk about healing, we have to heal ourselves before we try and check for others healing themselves, yo. It can't happen. It can't happen one side. If you're not working on you, there is no way you'd see anything beautiful. All you see is darkness. And I think we have to bring it down to labor. We have to bring it down.
Thank you so much. There's so much I think we could talk about, but I know we're running out of time here. And so what I'll do is I just have one last kind of question that I think we can use as sort of as a closing question. And I'll give each person a chance to say what they want to say. And I mean, you don't have to answer this question if there's something else you would rather end with, that's totally fine. But I also think given this conversation today being about, Jason and some other people brought up, these sort of connections between the global North and the global South. But I think we also need to think about beyond this sort of top-down approach, there are all these sorts of linkages that move outside of that, right? What is the Caribbean's connection to the Middle East? What is the Caribbean's connection to Africa? What is the Caribbean's connection to other sites that don't just move from up down, right? And so in this global summit, I just don't mean global South to global South, but outside of those languages, right? What does that actually mean, right? And how do we look at all of these crossings that go in directions we can't even think about yet, right? That are more multiple and complicated than just global North, global South. And so I also want us to think about, oftentimes I think in activism, sometimes a lot, we spend too much time on identity politics. We spend too much time on the individual. Me as this person, I have this problem, blah, 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 blah. But how can we think about our struggles as always interconnected, right? As always caught in the in-between, And how can we think and open up our understandings of what happens in the Caribbean as a form of pedagogy to think about the world on a planetary scale, right? We know that when COVID happened, COVID just didn't happen to Canada or the Caribbean. COVID happened to everyone, not in the same way, right? But this became a global planetary issue. And so if we are going to do this work, we have to do this work together and in consideration of everybody. And so maybe just on a closing note, I want us to think about how can we extend our politics, extend our practice to think through the transnational, to think through the global, to think through the planetary, in pursuit of our ongoing activisms and feminisms, which we can say are central to the Caribbean, but also move us beyond the Caribbean. And maybe I'll just start with Mo, if you'd like to speak first.
Sure, thanks, Ryan. You know, I hear Jason and I hear Kenita on this discussion, and the purpose of this conversation that we're having today is to bring healing to our community, but it's also our own healing, right? We have to acknowledge that as organizers, we experience trauma in a way that our community members will never see it. And the death threats that Jason experienced, we all have received those death threats. Many of us have received them, but how do we process it, right? Do we hold on to it and say, this death threat will define me and define my safety? Absolutely, because someone could very well kill you for simply existing and want to challenge the norm that exists in their world. But we also need to acknowledge when Kenita said community supports these cases, people are literally risking their lives to challenge these buggery laws. But we also have to make sure we invest in building the leadership skills and the capacity of our on-the-ground community members so they can speak for themselves, so they can protect themselves, so they have mechanisms where they have job security and housing. And yes, we can challenge the law and we can make sure we create change through the law. But if the people on the ground are still being killed, like Anthony Singh, how is challenging the law in Trinidad protecting our community members? And I personally have always admired Jason's work. I remember in 2018, we invited Jason to come to Toronto and be our keynote speaker at our Breaking Silences conference. And for the first time, so many folks in Toronto were able to engage with Jason and say to him, thank you. Thank you for leading this movement and giving us hope. And thank you. And I think tonight is an opportunity for us to say to each other, we respect you and we love you. Let's think of community first. Let's put community first. That's what this work will always be about. It will always be about community. And when we start to organize with the I's, and we forget the we and us, that's what performativity looks like. And we are seeing a lot of that right now. We're seeing how our community members are being tokenized for funding. We're seeing how organizations are accepting money without distributing that money to our community members. We're seeing how our homeless population is suffering because there's no on-the-ground outreach to assist them. And not just in the Caribbean, that also includes here in New York City. But as an organizer of this particular panel today, each and every one of you was selected and invited because your voice is so necessary. Your work is so necessary. And you represent joy, resilience, bravery, fearlessness that us in the diaspora and in the region are looking forward to. When we think of change, we're thinking of you that are on the ground that is leading the change. We're also thinking of folks in the diaspora like Gareth and Jason that are also moving mountains by being in the North. And the work that the Caribbean Equality Project does has become transnational, something we never imagined. But when we have capacity to respond to a crisis, we will respond. Just last year, our sister, Candace McCrae, lost her house to a fire. One of our very own activists, on-the-ground activists that have been leading trans activism in Guyana, was homeless. And what did we do about that? We have to think about how do we protect us as organizers as well. And we were able to raise over $5,000 for Candace to keep her safe. When Anthony Singh recently, just a couple months ago, was murdered, how did our community respond to that crisis? We can issue all the statements about this issue around gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. But if we are not protecting our community on the grounds, if we are not creating spaces for them to heal and to find community and to be in community, then when we die and we get attacked for simply being who we are, we have no relationship to that person, but to focus on the narrative that the media will use about that person's life. And this work is not about focusing on the narrative the media uses. You can do that, and that's your choice, but it's also about loving and protecting each other. It's about when one of us dies and one of us, our lives are taken from us, we also lose our joy because we now have the trauma to live with that one of our own was killed for simply existing and being who they are. And we now have to live with that. And our community will see that. And my sister Zoe said it best a couple weeks ago. Our community sees the inactivity that's happening that's happening in the Caribbean in response to violence. Our trans communities have been experiencing violence for years. And we have not even invited them to the table to have a conversation about these issues. And when we do invite them, we are tokenizing them or we silence them. And yesterday we saw on day one of this very summit, the power that exists in our Caribbean from our trans sisters and brothers. Their voices needs to be centered now. This movement, it's also about our trans brothers and sisters, and we need to center their voices. We need to make sure that every single time we use that acronym LGBTQ, that the T in that acronym is uplifted. Our lesbian sisters are uplifted. Our queer and non-binary people are uplifted. This work is so much bigger than all of us. It is so much bigger than all of us. But tonight, I want to say to all of you, to Alexa and Jason and Gareth and Kenita and Veronica, you all have been inspiration to me. Your work have inspired me so much that as a diasporic organizer, I can work with you and create spaces like this for us to be in community with each other. And maybe after this discussion, we will not look for accolades and credits, but we will move forward and say to each other, you know what? This is what transformative healing looks like as well. This is what transformative justice looks like as well, where we can be on a panel and potentially disagree and have disagree with each other views on things, but still be in community with each other. because this is what progress looks like. And I'm hoping next year, whether we're still virtual or in person, we can continue these conversations on how to protect our community, but also challenge the constitution of countries that is harming us. And for us in the diaspora, I tell you one thing, we love our home countries. We want to go back. We want to go and celebrate. We want to be safe. We want to walk the streets with our partners. But a lot of us are also fearful of what violence awaits us. And many of us have struggled to come out of the closet. And many of us coming out means liberation. And oftentimes visiting the Caribbean can challenge that. So for folks that are watching, that are on the grounds, y'all have no idea how much love and respect I have for each and every single one of you. Because you are living your truth, knowing that your very existence could be erased. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. Kenita, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think that when we share spaces like that, it's very much important. Agree, disagree, same side, whatever. And I think Mohammed, you said it right, because regardless of seeing things differently, there's no one on this call I wouldn't jump on a plane or move mountains to get to if I have to. And anyone who knows me well knows that. You can be in the UK, you can be in Barbados, you can be in Canada if you need me, you get me. But when we think about activism, we want to bring in the diaspora. We want to break that feeling or that continuation of digressing the relationship once people get into the diaspora. And I think it's a conversation that Lisa Duplessis with 519 in Canada and I have been having for the last 3 years. Because let's talk about seriously about what asylum looks like. Let's talk about seriously about the impact of having to leave home and having to readjust to systems and culture that's not necessarily your own. Let's talk about what it is to leave everyone you ever knew and going into a new environment with people who say they will support you and then end up on your own. We also have the other aspect of this conversation. How, when someone makes that decision to leave home, is it really a decision? Is it really a choice? For most persons leaving home, it's not a choice, it's a have to. And so people back in the region have to understand that and understand that engagement. And I think there's a profound feeling that you have gone and left. And therefore, it's not, you are no longer part of it. But I think some of what we also have to talk about is how persons in the diaspora actually work with people on the ground in the region. Particularly when, like you said, I think Gareth said it when he said, we need to speak with the organizations, we need to speak with community. And please note, speaking with organizations are not all. Because someone may be well in a country, in an organization, and might be furthest from understanding what's the reality on the ground. So if you can speak with people on the ground, please speak to people on the ground. I am not one to say, stick with organization and that's it. I don't believe that. I don't believe in gatekeepers that will keep people out. I don't believe in organizations that do not create seats at the table for even the people they disagree with. We have to bring all and sundry. And I would tell you that even if you and I have a disagreement, I still want you at the table because you might be the one checking me out to make sure I do the right thing. And that is something that we have to take. We cannot just bring people to the table that will agree and rubber stamp everything we want. We have to bring those people who disagree also. That's what keeps us accountable. That's what keeps us transparent. Now, the work ECADE have been doing on the ground, our focus is the Eastern Caribbean. And we deliberately named ECADE Eastern Caribbean so that it would not be OACS and Barbados. We didn't want Barbados to be like a carry along. We wanted them inclusive, right? And so our work has been across 9 countries, but you only hear us speak about 7 because it's the 7 that has the criminalized laws. The other countries we work in are territories. But that has not stopped us from hosting stuff like the Women's Conference, Caribbean Women and Sexual Diversity Conference, which happens every year in October, and it happens Caribbean-wide. We have gone to Curacao, we have gone to Suriname, we have gone to St. Croix, we have been in Jamaica, Belize, Trinidad, and we are willing to host it in any country that wants to host it. The point is, let's bring our Caribbean people together. And why was this conference even started in the first place? It started because almost all our organizations in the Caribbean was led by men. They were led by MSMs. And this was a space created so that the empowerment of lesbian, bisexual, trans people could have happened, to push them up. Why can't you lead your own organization? Why can't you be the chair or the executive director of an organization? The oldest women organizations in the Caribbean is actually Suriname. That's fully registered. But before them, there was Women for Women in Jamaica for years. There was Quality Citizen Jamaica, again, doing things for women. But that's things you would not hear about because during the time of their existence, all the funding went to MSMs or HIV. Very little funding in the Caribbean for women organization or trans organization. If we have to check back in the last decade, maybe about 2010, 2011, and I'm still thinking that's too early, trans organizing became visible. There is no history of it before, even if our people existed. So again, it's understanding the steps that have been taken by people to ensure inclusive, diverse opportunities are actually created. We're creating spaces for people to step up and step out. Speak your truth. Speak your power. It's nobody on to tell. Now, Ryan, there's a very important point you ask, because as we look at the work in this region, it has not been in a vacuum. This work has happened because I have connected. And right here, Gareth, I'm going to check in my privilege. From time meeting Robert Carr in 2006, Veronica Snack, Joan Didier, yourself in Jamaica, in St. Lucia, this is what mobilized me. I didn't do it by myself. I asked questions. I asked for support. I asked for help to move things forward. I had the conversations. You understand? Because again, understanding what is out there, how it's done, I may not necessarily agree. But before I challenge it, I need to understand why it's happening that way. And then look at how can I help change it. But I don't want to change it. And most of the changes I've made, I have to agree, came from a selfish point. I wanted better for me. But whilst I was thinking about I want better for me, I started doing like, hey, Gareth, you want better? Amin, you want better? Alexa, you want better? Oh, it's not just me, it's us. That changes the perspective. So how are we bringing people to the table? And our work did not just join with those folks. I went to Canada, I met with 519, I met with Black Cap, I met with Rainbow Railroad. I needed to understand their services and how our people can actually benefit as they move. Who can I connect them with? Who is the immigration lawyer? Who is this? I went to the US, I went to the UK. I went to Amsterdam and I did the very same thing. And you know what's the privilege here? I had a passport with my name. I had people who invited me to a meeting that afforded me the opportunity to do so. Again, it did not happen in a vacuum. I don't have 2 cents to my name. And to be quite honest, if it wasn't for activism, I probably would not have reached any of the 74 countries I have touched in my lifetime in the last decade. Activism is what brought me, because I have never spent a dime to go on vacation. As a matter of fact, I don't even know what it's like to have vacation for the last 20 years, because I do not know what to do with downtime. Every time they say downtime, somebody call me for crisis, I'm down, I'm gone. It's work. And that's what has saved me. Now, part of that work is also connecting with Asia, like ACCOM. When you have Midnight coming up this week, we'll be talking about work in Asia. I've met Midnight because we have spoken about the work. I've met people from different parts of Africa. As a matter of fact, one of the strongest political points they have working right now, and we are looking at how to expand it, is understanding that our government within the UN, within the Global Forum, tends to connect Africa, Pacific, and Caribbean governments work together against Global North. South talking to each other, even in governments. Guess what? We're doing the same as civil society. So I am connected to Access Chapter 2 in South Africa. I'm connected to House of Chameleon in Pacific, because we needed to understand how our governments work and track them. I can't track them everywhere. Some places Africa is, some places Pacific is. We're connecting the dots. We're connecting the dots on more than one thing. Whilst we're working on diversity and inclusion, what does that mean? Just the 1st of June, I challenge corporates in the US. What is meaningful contribution to civil society? And just what you said tonight about the branding and the marketing, and I challenge them on that too, because Outright International gave me an opportunity to speak with them on a panel. Every opportunity we get, people, we use it to advance the things. Sometimes it's not even advancing it for us directly, but there are indirect implications. What happens with Outright affects us. What happened with Black Cap affects us. What happens with CP affects us. One way or the other, because we are connected as a people. We are connected because we are LGBTQ, we are Black, we in the Global South. All of those things connect the dots. We connect with the Pacific again because it's the 2 sets of small islands that deal with climate change exclusively. We are deeply affected. Let's learn from each other. So today, this panel gives us an opportunity to talk about what we're doing. The globe is a very small place, whilst it seems very large for us. But what's happening in one place, even if culturally and socially different, technically is still the same. And so I want to thank every single one of you, and I look forward to how we continue working, because I think it's important. It's absolutely important. Litigation is one side. Living life is another side. And as we continue to self-identify, as we continue to self-accept, as we continue to actually put through, and we look at self-love, and we look at self-care, understand and know that, yes, we are coming from different places. Our traumas are different. Our healing process will be different. How people see us and accept us is different. However, be grounded in who you are. Be grounded in you. Your happiness starts within. Regardless of all who around you, at the end of the day, if you are not happy with you, then you're sending yourself more trauma than necessary. So let's start the healing process from inside. And I really look forward. I still know I have issues to deal with. Yes, Antoine, I know you're going to come and tell me that, but I'm taking one day at a time. and I'm dealing. Yes, Mohammed, I had to stick it there before anybody tell me. Thank you.
Thanks, Kanita. Veronica, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I always feel I shouldn't take up much time at all on a panel like this. And that is because when I started being involved in advocacy work as a young person, as a youth leader in the Caribbean and in St. Lucia, the Caribbean Federation of Youth and the National Youth Council. And when I left that role, you know, it's a stepping stone to other things. My role now is to be in the background and to provide that the communities need. I have committed, and a lot of us, not just lawyers, but other activists, some of have committed time. So I am in awe of everybody who is here on this panel. I am seriously in awe of Kenita. She keeps saying it's the other way around sometimes, but I'm seriously in awe of Kenita. She is beyond fantastic, and her team that she has in ECAID are excellent. We do a lot of work. Gareth is one of my heroes, like Robert. Robert, when we started CBC, CBC was mainly to bring voice to the voiceless. That was one of the things we kept saying all the time. It was to create the space for the persons who did not have the space at the table. And I think CBC has successfully done that. And so, you know, to be here and to hear all of you talk, I can quietly stay in the background, but I generally don't. And I generally like to be a little bit combative. I am a lawyer after all, and I will generally challenge you. I will never sit in a room and agree with everything you say. I will try to find a way to ask you a question, to say it in such a way that will make you move and perhaps see it differently. We must always disagree if our disagreement is going to help us to advance. We must not accept everything we hear. We should inform ourselves of what the true picture is and then see how we can address it. And that is the role, and I think that's the role I almost on a daily basis I do with Kenita. To move things along. We have moved very far in the Caribbean, and I don't think people even recognize that. But it's shocking for me to admit that I'm a little older these days, and we have progressed. You know, I'm gray a little bit like Gareth, but much more so. 10 years ago, transgender, somebody would tell you what transgender people we have in the Caribbean. I mean, I knew it, and Gareth knew it, and all of us knew it, but the public would not admit. And Alexa, you would, I'm sure I agree, would not admit that there were any transgender persons in any of the countries. And now we have Alexa, we have Alexas in the Bahamas, we have persons in St. Kitts and in Antigua and whatnot who are openly transgender in the community, who can sit in a meeting with ministers of government and whatnot, and who are there and they present, and their voice, their authentic voice, is being heard, not my voice, as part of this wider thing. But that authentic voice is there. And that's I wanted to say that. And the resilience is what it is we're trying to do. We can't achieve resilience if we do not build a community. And that is where I keep saying it is us. It cannot never be a singular issue. When it comes to litigation case, Jason and Alexa, you are right. It's your right as a citizen. And I will defend that right. I will bring your case for you, right? But when it comes to this particular issue, it is a community. And if we don't see resilience as building a community, not just the as Kenita said, but the social and economic issues have to be addressed. We have no research in the Caribbean in terms of the levels of employment or lack of employment amongst LGBT communities in the region. What are we doing? We generally know that most are involved in the tourism industry, and with COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs. They were totally dislocated. So the social impact and economic impact on those communities were even greater than the general population. We have very little information about housing and whatnot. So these are the kinds of things that I think of, and that's where we have to progress. ECAID is doing a review on hate crime legislation. We are challenging the burglary laws, and we're doing research on hate crimes because we know we're preparing, if you want to call it, to look at some of those other issues. We know that the case was successful in Trinidad, but guess what? In Trinidad, consensual sex between adolescents is still criminalized with the potential of life imprisonment for minors. for adolescents is ridiculous, even in the face of Jason's success in the court. So there's still a lot of work to do, but the resilience means, and it means linking to the community, but Kenita explained that exceedingly well, but it also means that as a community, there are bigger things that we have to address. We have to address the social and economic situation of people who are within the LGBT community. Give them a voice, give them a face, but also give them the opportunity that some of us take for granted. I hope I never take for granted my privilege. And until I am not breathing, I will continue to be as challenging and as assistive as I can, not only as a lawyer, but as an advocate for persons in the community. And I thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think I have to recognize that some people I would, some are in and some are out. Robert was and continues to be one of my eternal mentors. Gareth and Ian McKnight in Jamaica, and of course Ivan Cruikshank in CVC, and Donna DaCosta Martinez in Barbados, who is the head of the Planned Parenthood Association. A lot of people who have done out about, in Canada, Richard Elliott, the head of the executive director of the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, who himself is moving on. And people like Maurice Tomlinson, who's constantly challenging as well. Maurice is one of these people who's very much like me. He will challenge you. I will agree with you, but I will challenge you anyway to see how, to see whether or not we need to really progress and advance in the issue. So thank you very much, everyone, for allowing me to be part of this time.
Thanks, Veronica. I just wanted to note we're 40 minutes over, which is it's great for this conversation. But I know that maybe just as we're finishing up here, if we could just keep our last conclusions a little bit brief, just so that if people need to head out, that they are able to do so. Sorry, I don't want to cut anyone off, but just to let us know. Thanks so much. Gary, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go and I'll be short. And I want to say thanks though for this healing opportunity to engage and to talk about important issues that are affecting, continue to affect us as LGBTQ folks, and to see how we can build the bridge that is the important bridge that needs to be built between the global north and south, so that we can continue to work and to work together in meaningful ways. Part of it for me, I remember, I started in this work 20 years ago. I was a 24-year-old kid who volunteered to be the face or the voice for the gay community on the death of J Flag's leader at that point in time, Brian Williams. I remember that vividly, the 9th of June, when 2004, and there was who will speak to the media, who will talk to the media, and I didn't know what I was getting into, and I raised my hand. And what was important after raising my hand and having that first initial conversation that outed me to even my family and everyone around me was I had community. The leaders, the founding members of J Flag community, or the activists, and everyone were there. Again, we all take calculated risks in our lives and our journey, and activism looks different for everyone. But the important piece and the critical piece is that if community is not at the center, then we have to examine what is it we're doing. So we can't have true activism without people. We can't have it without our community. We must be able to engage, and at every point in time, finding meaningful ways to bring our community along. We talk about healing, and one important piece for me, with healing and transformation is that we create a healing space when I am willing to listen and appreciate and validate the thoughts, the energy, and the experiences of someone else, or other persons, or all the persons here on this call. So a part of my healing today was to allow myself to absorb all that has been shared, and to be reflective and to celebrate with you your strength and your resilience. That's a healing space for me. And so I thank that we were able to create that this evening. And, the last piece of it, I'll go back to say, changing the laws is important. It's something that has to happen, but it has to be balanced. So some of us have to deal with litigation, And some of us have to be the gunsman on the ground, mobilizing and supporting communities in a meaningful way. And both goes hand in hand, because changing laws do not change attitudes and behaviors, right? I have to always remember that. So all the laws could be repealed across the Caribbean, but gay people, trans people, lesbians continue to be killed, continue to live in abstract poverty, to be homeless. And so we, an important piece for me and the work I want to do and I want to do beyond this call and to continue with this conversation is what we're social justice part of our work, right? What does that look like? How are we going to support and to build the capacity, particularly of our trans community, who oftentimes, is left behind, right? And the non-binary folks, the same thing. And also for lesbian, and also, I take note all the time for my privilege as a cis gay man, because I don't have to say much. All issues are consistently in the media. It gets attention. It's a gay man. It gets right now. Even the work we do in HIV, that's where the funding goes to. MSM, and it's everything about us. So for me, understanding and identifying that privilege, I want to be able to break that down, because it doesn't serve community, and to find ways in which we can uplift and bring everyone along. That's the diversity, that's the inclusion that needs to happen within the LGBTQI community, that we recognize and value and lift those up who are more vulnerable among us, and create space for them to be also their authentic self, and to seize opportunities for growth and development and absolute freedom at some point in time. And so I want to say thanks for inviting me to be a part of this discussion, which was really good, and looking forward to continue the conversations and dialogue and working with each and every one of you on this call. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Garrett. Next, we're just going to Alexa.
Yes, I've been sitting here taking a lot of food for thought, thinking on various matters. I just want to touch on something that Kenita had mentioned. Sorry to say, for lack of better words, in her earlier rant on, when it comes to supporting advocates, supporting people who, take on certain risks and whatnot. And I was observing in the chat that we have here amongst ourselves, she was asking, what type of support. And I was saying, because I made mention that I have a matter before the Employment Rights Tribunal against my former employer where I worked as a legal assistant. And she was asking what type of support that I would require. And anytime I think about that matter, I mean, I have pretty competent legal counsel, and there have already been previous offers for to support, whether financially or otherwise. And usually I draw a blank because that's not where my mind usually is. Where my mind usually is with the issue of employment discrimination against trans and gender non-conforming people. Kenita, you would remember when we first met face to face about how long has it been? 6 years, 2015 with CGAD. I was doing a project on that and discussing the issue. And ever since then, my mind has always been on the issue and the mechanisms behind it. The type of support that really is needed, and not just in the context of my matter, but or not even just in the context of employment discrimination, but in the context of any matter whatsoever as it relates to advocacy. It is more than just going out there and speaking with the press and whether it's donating funds or whatever heavy lifting. Sometimes it's even the little things that count. When you have advocates that they're putting themselves out there, they're taking blows, they're putting things on the line, things that they may not think are a risk to them, because like I said, there's some people that they don't think they're risking anything, or they don't think they have anything to lose, and so they just put whatever on the line. It matters a lot to just have people in their corner, and when I say in their corner, that they're paying attention to what's being said. They're taking the time to think about what type of change can they also effect. It doesn't always have to be that you must come and hold your hand every step of the way, but it's also what effort are you going to do when you are out in your own circles and you see things going on. and you see, certain behaviors, whether it's acts of prejudice, whether they're, bigoted statements, whether they're out of the way comments and remarks, what are you going to do? What role are you going to play to assist this person in dealing with it where you are? It's just like how you put your support to things like respect for the divergently able, preventing gender-based violence. It doesn't always have to be, somebody that it could be a case where you go there and you see a stranger and they're in difficulty. Are you going to go and do your part and try to help them because you understand what a problem that issue is that they're facing? Because you may be aware of it, whether it's happened to you, whether it's happened to someone close to you. And so, things, even things such as picking up the phone, calling, checking in on people, do a check-in. There are a lot of people, like I said, there are people who say, oh, you're being so brave, you're being so this, you're being so that. And like I said, I don't think that I'm being brave. I don't think that I'm, necessarily doing anything monumental, as much as people try to show that to me. I'm just doing what I think is necessary. But like anybody else, there's going to be a moment where you're going to overheat, you're going to start to burn out. Check on your friends, pick up the phone, send a text message, send an email. If you know where they live and you're able to, move about, because I know wherever you are, there may be COVID guidelines and whatnot. Pop by, pay a visit. Hey, just checking in. I haven't seen you in a while. I'm just going to show my face, make sure you're okay. Is there anything you want to discuss? Is there anything on your mind? Those are some of the ways that you can offer support. And also educating yourself, taking the opportunity in between when Kenita or Jason or myself or Veronica or Gareth or Mohammed, in between the opportunities like this, where we're putting everything on the table and we're saying, this is what we're doing. Take the initiative that, when this chat has ended, when whatever press conference, when whatever, opportunity to educate and sensitize has passed, in between those opportunities, go do your due diligence, do your own research, go and look up things. The documents all about the place, documentaries, even just communicate with people on Facebook. We spend so much time on Facebook. Part of my French shit posting and posting this and sharing that. Take the time to talk to some of the people on your friends list, have some discussions, ask some questions, get some answers, compare notes, analyze, question, even if it's something that you, when you get the information, it makes you uncomfortable. Ask yourself, why do I feel uncomfortable? Why is this making me uncomfortable? Even if something sounds a little too simple, ask yourself, is it that simple? Like how Veronica challenges people, how Maurice challenges people. Pick it down and try to figure out, how does this issue tick and what role can I play? Is it that I'm going to play a role that's going to, keep it in play, or is my role going to help dismantle it? And that's the way how you can support not just my case, not just, when Jason's case was going on, how people could have supported his, not just, any other cases going around, or, general advocacy, but just generally supporting the community. That is how you can offer support. And that is something that really needs to happen. Because as has been stressed categorically, changing law, that isn't going to change hearts and minds. And it's not, as much as we all do, we can't foot the entire grunt work for that. There's some of it that, and I'm saying this to audience members, to anybody who listens to this, there's some of it that you have an onus to yourself to take on some of the work, do your due diligence and see what you can do, and I can't even stress it enough alongside everybody else. Quite right. The law changes. There are going to be some people who are just dedicated to defying the law, to violating human rights, and they're going to do it anyway. It's much like speeding. The law says you can't drive over a certain speed. There's somebody that's going to take the car up to 100 miles an hour and they don't give a damn. But then there are going to be some people that they're going to say, you know what? What can I do to ensure that the roads are safer, not just for me, but for other people? And when I see something is wrong, speak up, say something. That's all it takes. All of us on this earth, whether you're involved in advocacy or not, we all have the ability to do our own bit for the LGBTI community, for any other marginalized group or demographic. And once we take it upon ourselves and we realize we have a responsibility, not just to other people, but to ourselves, and we do what we need to do in the pursuance of that responsibility, in the fulfillment of that responsibility, that is when we're going to see the changes coming in. Just like how with some of the sub-demographics in the LGBTI community, it wasn't just, you know, gay men going out and speaking. It was the families and friends of gay men that had to educate themselves and ask questions. And then they come to realize, you know what? I am now able to get closer to a point of acceptance. May not be 100%, and Rome wasn't built in a day, sorry to use the cliche, but when those who may not be directly impacted take the time to understand and empathize and have that compassion, that is when the wheels start turning. So with that being said, I also want to take the opportunity to uplift a few of the other trans people in the region, people like Brandy Rodriguez in Trinidad, people like Billy Bryan in the Cayman Islands, Nairobi Castillo de la República Dominicana, as well as Liam from Belize, Liam Reyes from Belize. You know, these are people that I have interacted with, met in person, had the pleasure of working with, and you know, they're doing so much on the ground. There are also a slew of other names that I have not mentioned simply in the interest of time. These are also people that they're doing so much, and it really helps when we can network and get an idea, not just of the Caribbean context, but even the territorial context in terms of what similarities and differences are there between Belize and Barbados, Bahamas and Trinidad, Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. And as was said earlier by someone, we need to take the opportunity to learn from one another, and that is where the bulk of, you know, our work as advocates comes in, learning from one another and encouraging others to do their own due diligence as well.
Thanks so much, Alexa. Just before I close off with Jason here, I actually have to, I'm so sorry, I have to head out. But thank you so much to everyone for being here. Thanks to Mohammed for allowing me to moderate today. It was so wonderful to see some of you I've seen in person, and it's nice to see you virtually, and some of you I've never met before, and so it's nice it's nice to meet you. But I hope one day we can be in physical space and get on board together. But until then, thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to Jason.
Thank you so much, and I'm so emotional right now hearing all of these stories. I've been working for LGBT activism for 34 years, and me and my ex-partner from Trinidad and Tobago, we changed laws in the United Kingdom in 1997, and I'm very blessed that I've changed laws in Trinidad and Tobago in 2018. What I would like to say to everybody watching this is all of these people who have shared their stories, who have shared their lives with us, are incredibly powerful people. I am so honored to share this space with all of you this evening. And I am blessed to be honored by all of your love and strength to create a better world for all of us. So I just want to say thank you so much for your guidance and listening and power to hear all of these stories tonight. I think tonight has been such an amazing moment for us all. So thank you so much. And bless you all, and bless human rights for us all. Thank you.
So I think we're going to pass it back to Marcus. Marcus, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Such an exciting and it was an amazing opportunity to sit back and have to listen around how people are unpacking ideas of similarities and dissimilarities in what we call the common work. It was important to hear about how people talking about different positions about the I and the we in this kind of activism, so vital. We heard persons unpack notions of entitlement, tokenism, accountability. We saw people reflect on misogyny, and all of these important notions around what transformational leadership looks like in the community and in different places, different spaces, at different times, at different levels. So I think this was an excellent opportunity as we didn't only look at resilience, but we come to learn that resilience is a process, that healing becomes a process. We also saw the difficulties in healing while doing this work. So it becomes an ongoing process as well. The importance of taking time, stepping away. I think all of these things became so vital as we heard our panelists express where they're at in their activism, where they're at in changing, shifting, cultural notions around queer communities and our position and our value. So this was quite an important conversation, and I do know that in the near future, students and scholars would look back at this kind of conversation as tools, foundations, starters to understand where the movement is at, what our activists are feeling, and how activists, in the region are doing their work. So I think this is an excellent place to be in as we unpack all of these things I just listed. So with that said, I think it's important that we take some time to just ground ourselves, kind of just end in a little bit more of a playful, a little bit more of a celebratory, as the work continues, as Pride Month continues, as human rights activism continues. I think we will go straight into our performance. Video by the Caribbean Equality Project, and then we will go straight into Tiante McCoy closing remarks as we end this evening's summit. So folks, I know we went over time. I think it's valuable information. Unapologetically, it is without doubt going to be words and messaging needed to reflect, to recap, to just look at what we're doing on an everyday basis. So we go straight into the COP's performance video and straight into McCoy vote of thanks and closing remarks. So thank you very much, folks, for having me, and look forward to the continuous support, collective efforts, and community solidarity. So thank you.
I am not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say, no one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down.
down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words wanna cut me down, I'm gonna send the blood, gonna drown them out. I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come. And I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me.
Music is the song I'm singing, music is the way I'm giving, music is my life, the meaning, music makes my world go.
Yeah, give it up for CEP, 5 years.
And I am a warrior, preparing for war. And I am a warrior, I step through this door. The enemy is ignorance. Hey, the enemy is hate. And I am a warrior, a warrior. I'm fighting for, I'm fighting for, I'm fighting for love. Your eyes are closed, you're next to me. Our fingers touching, don't fall asleep. I want to see you nude in the moonlight. The shore is empty, this time it's right. Yeah. Lips are tender, bodies close, our hearts are reaching. Who could give the most? Our thoughts are dancing slow, our thighs no meat. Souls are singing a harmony so sweet. 'Cause you're the one for me. We were meant to be. Baby, can't you see? This is our destiny. You're the one for me. We were meant to be. Yeah. Yeah. Love is so sweet. Love is so
A pleasant good night to all. I think we can all agree that all of this is the end of 2 productive days. We have all gained insight, knowledge, and a stronger sense of community. I would like to thank the production team and the Caribbean Equality Project for providing this platform where we could speak freely and connect. With that said, the panel discussions were timely and both topics were very much needed. And I do hope that we can further network to address and solve issues within these communities. A special thanks to all the participants for sharing their knowledge and stories. In closing, I would like to leave you all with a quote by Barbara Gittings. Equality means more than passing laws. The struggle is really one in the hearts and minds of the community where it's really count. End of quote. And the work we are doing here and the impact we are encouraging, we will definitely win over the hearts and minds of every community. I bid you all a pleasant evening and a happy Pride Month.